Folks, I want to start with a simple word because it is the only word that actually describes what is happening inside the Democrat Party right now. And that word is collapse, because that is exactly what this is: a collapse, not a bad news cycle, not a rough week, not a couple of unlucky headlines, a full blown structural collapse. And I'm going to walk you through it piece by piece, because when you lay it all out side by side, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. And I think that is exactly why the mainstream liberal media or corporate media wants to cover each of these stories separately, because separately there are scandals, but together there are a diagnosis. And the diagnosis is that a political party, which has spent a decade lecturing this country about morality ethics and who is fit to hold power, is now watching its own bench get arrested, indicted, sued, and exposed from coast to coast. And I am not saying that to be cute. I am saying that because it is true, and because facts do not care about your feelings. So let us start with the story everybody is searching for right now, and that is Kyrsten Sinema, the former senator from Arizona, as you see on the screen, who represented that state from 2019 to 2025 before she ditched the Democrat label and rebranded herself an independent, which, if you have been paying attention, is usually the move a politician makes right before the walls start closing in. And according to a new court filings, a woman has come forward accusing Sonoma of carrying on a sexual relationship with her married bodyguard while Sonoma was serving in the United States Senate, and the bodyguard's now ex-wife has filed suit under a legal theory some states still recognize called alienation. All right. And alienation of affection. Basically, that's what it's called. Essentially arguing that Sonoma's conduct helped destroy a 14-year marriage. And look, I am not going to sit here and read you every gory detail, because you do not need the graphic play by play to understand the point. The point is simple: a sitting United States senator is accused in a court filing of carrying on with a married man who was assigned to protect her. And regardless of your politics, regardless of your party, and regardless of your gender, that is a serious breach of judgment for someone entrusted with representing millions of people. And here is the part that should make every single person watching this uncomfortable. If this were a Republican senator accused of the exact same thing in a court filing, you and I both know CNN, MSNBC, and every alphabet network would be running it as the lead story for 2 straight weeks with chyrons flashing. And yet, watch how quietly this gets buried, and watch how fast these news cycles, or this cycles out of the news, I should say. And that tells you everything about how selective the outrage really is in this country. Now that brings us to Eric Swalwell. Let's talk about Eric Swalwell, because this one is not new information dressed up as new information. This is a pattern finally catching up to a man who spent years positioning himself as a champion of women and accountability. And according to CNN's own reporting, mind you, not Fox, not some conservative outlet, CNN sat down with 4 separate women who have come forward with allegations against the former congressman, ranging from unwanted messages and images to allegations of assault. And one woman, a former staffer, described an encounter when she was just 21 years old. And folks, I'm going to be straight with you. I'm not going to narrate the graphic specifics on this show, because you do not need shock value to understand the seriousness here. What you need to understand is the hypocrisy, because this is the same Eric Swalwell who stood in front of cameras during the Kavanaugh hearings and said we must believe all women, we must believe survivors, accountability matters. And now that the shoe is on the other foot, that is his own conduct being scrutinized by CNN of all outlets. Suddenly, I have not heard him repeat that same phrase, have you? And that right there, ladies and gentlemen, is the entire Democrat playbook exposed in real time. Morality is a weapon to be pointed outward, never a standard to be applied inward. And then we have James Comey. And folks, this story just got a lot more interesting, because remember that seashell photo, right? The seashell photo that one arranged to spell out 8647? 8647. Slang for eliminate or get rid of. And 47 is, of course, a reference to the currently sitting president. Well, Comey's defense from day one was that it was an innocent beach photo. Nothing more, just shells on a beach, purely coincidental, except now, according to an FBI affidavit filed in connection with a search warrant, we have learned that just 2 minutes before Comey posted that photo, his wife, Patrice, this is his wife on the screen, Patrice, sent him a screenshot from Google. Folks, I want you to sit with that timeline for a second. Before posting the message widely interpreted as a threat against the president, his own wife is sending him a prepared explanation for what the number means. And if that's a coincidence, I have got some oceanfront property in Kansas to sell you. This is him with his wife again. This is what is called consciousness of guilt in legal terms. It means you know what you were doing. You knew what you were doing was going to look bad, so you built your alibi before you even committed the act. And now Comey's team is filing motions to suppress that very evidence, trying to keep the jury and the public from ever seeing that text message. And here you have it, family. On May 15, 2025, Comey and his wife Patrice were walking along a beach on Emerald Isle, North Carolina, when he noticed an arrangement of shells forming the digits 8647. At first, Comey thought it was an address. He later told investigators, but then realized it was a political message. His wife, who was a waitress in her youth, explained to him that 86 was restaurant slang for being out of something or to dump or get rid of an item. She would later tell investigators at 1:56 p.m. Comey took a photo of the seashells or the shells. All times are Eastern time. Later, Patrice suggested Comey that he post the photo on Instagram at 3:12 p.m. She texted Comey a screenshot of a Google search stating what 86 meant. In U.S. slang, 86 means to get rid of or to refuse service. 2 minutes later, Comey posted the photo on Instagram, captioning it "Cool shell formation on my beach walk." So you see the evidence from a Google search from his wife, Patricia, who basically texts Comey. And Comey's team is filing motions to brush the very evidence, trying to keep the jury and the public from ever seeing the text message. And folks, when the defense strategy shifts from "it means nothing" to "please do not let anyone see the evidence," that is not a strong position. That is a legal team in retreat. And think about what this actually means, right? Or actually look like in practice for a second. Because we're not talking about some vague hypothetical. We're talking about the former director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a man who spent his entire career trained to understand how evidence, timelines, and patterns get built into a criminal case. This is the man who knows exactly how consciousness of guilt gets argued in front of a jury. And people aren't buying it, right? As you see in this comment, that's impossible because I was reliably informed that he would just randomly stumble on these seashells. Another comment, as you see, it says the idea that a former FBI director had zero clue 86 carries an edge to it doesn't pass the laugh test. And then you have another informative post in regards to the matter when I was speaking of the FBI affidavit that I informed you guys about. It says breaking. An FBI affidavit for a search warrant in the James Comey presidential threat case reveals his wife, Patrice Comey, sent him a Google screenshot of a non-violent definition of the term 86 2 minutes before Comey posted the alleged threat against President Trump, indicating some forethought his posting could be construed as a threat. So again, James Comey, this man knows how exactly consciousness of guilt gets argued in front of a jury because he sat through briefings on that exact legal concept probably 100 times over the course of his career. Here he is allegedly on the receiving end of the very same kind of circumstantial pattern that he would have flagged in a heartbeat if it belonged to someone else. And folks, that is not hypocrisy. That is almost poetic justice. And I do not say that lightly because a threat against a sitting president, however it is dressed up, is a serious matter and should be treated as one regardless of who is on the other end of the investigation. Now, his estranged wife, Patrice, is not just some bystander caught up in her husband's mess. According to the reporting, she is squarely in the middle of the timeline, and any prosecutor worth their salt is going to look hard at whether she assisted after the fact or whether she has some level of advanced knowledge. And folks, that puts her in a very uncomfortable legal position because aiding and cover up, even out of loyalty to a spouse, is still a very serious exposure. And I think what makes this story so remarkable is how it reveals the same pattern we saw throughout Comey's entire public career, which is calculated ambiguity or questioning. Say something with plausible deniability built in, and then if anyone calls it out, claim they misunderstood the intent. Well, folks, a text message with a timestamp does not misunderstand anything. A timestamp is just a fact sitting there waiting to be read by a jury. Now, let me pull the camera back because Sonoma, Swalwell, and Comey are not isolated incidents. They are symptoms, and the disease itself is playing out in the courthouses, and the state houses across this entire country right now. Like, let me give you the roll call from just the last several days alone. A New Mexico House leader convicted for diverting public education funding in a friend's company in exchange for kickbacks, facing potentially 20 years behind bars. A Massachusetts mayor arrested for allegedly funding over $1.5 million in COVID. And let me switch the screen to show you guys. Here's what I'm talking about. So you have Massachusetts mayor, COVID relief funds meant for small businesses into his own campaign and personal debts. A New Jersey councilwoman charged with faking signatures just to get her name on the ballot. A Georgia state representative who pled guilty to collecting nearly $18,000 in unemployment benefits she was never entitled to while simultaneously holding public office. A Missouri city executive indicted on bribery charges for allegedly trying to pay off a political opponent to drop out of a race. And vice mayor in Mississippi charged with rigging a city contract to benefit his own company. And folks, that is not a comprehensive list, as you see on the screen. That is just what surfaced in a span of about a week. Add to that a former nonprofit executive arrested over donor funds, allegedly funneled through shell companies, a state lieutenant governor facing a dozen felony counts tied to pandemic testing contracts and bribery, and a former big city mayor facing federal fraud and bribery charges over recycling contracts and no-show jobs. And folks, I want you to actually sit with the sheer variety of that list that you see on the screen for a second. Because this is not one type of crime repeating itself. This is not just campaign finance violations. And it is not just one bad apple in one state. We're talking about education funding diverted through kickback schemes. We're talking about COVID relief money meant for small businesses struggling to survive a pandemic, instead landing in someone's personal campaign account. We are talking about forged ballot signatures. We're talking about unemployment fraud committed by the very people who write the laws governing unemployment benefits. We're talking about attempted bribery to manipulate an election outcome. And we're talking about rigged government contracts and no-show jobs handed out like party favors. And when you diversify the crimes across that many categories and that many states and that short a window, that is not bad luck. That is a culture. And a culture like that does not happen by accident. It happens when accountability mechanisms inside a party stop functioning, when leadership either does not know or does not care what is happening in his own ranks until the FBI comes knocking. And folks, here is what really gets me. Every single one of these officials ran on a platform of serving the public, of standing up for the little guy, of fighting corruption and special interests. And yet behind closed doors, the evidence suggests they were doing the exact opposite, lining their own pockets while working people watch their tax dollars and their pandemic relief and their public education funding get siphoned off for a personal gain. And look, I'm not naive enough to sit here and tell you corruption only exists on one side of the aisle. It does not. Politicians of every party, going back generations, have been caught with their hand in the cookie jar. And that is just human nature. When you concentrate power, you create temptation. But what makes this moment different is the scale and the timing of all this surfacing at once, right as this party is trying to convince the country it deserves the moral high ground going into the midterms. And folks, you cannot have it both ways. You cannot spend a decade telling the country you are the party of ethics and accountability while your own bench is getting perp walked out of city halls and state houses from coast to coast. Hmm. So you guys see the evidence here. You see the proof is in the pudding. President Trump also endorsed New York Attorney General Letitia James to unseat her in November. But I want to ask you something, because this is a question nobody in the mainstream liberal media press wants to ask out loud. If this were happening on the Republican side, if we had this many elected officials from one party facing these many arrests, convictions, and indictments in this short window, do you think for 1 second it would not be top story on every network every single night around the clock? And yet here we are in the silence from the same people who spent years telling us this is who we are and democracy is at stake is deafening, because it turns out democracy was never really the concern. That's why the stake is deafening. Power was. And now that power is slipping, the mask is coming off. Right? And let me give you another example of the mask coming off. Nevada's Secretary of State, Cisco Aguilar, was asked directly at a DNC general session whether the party wants to be right or wants to win. And his answer without hesitation was, I want to win. Folks, read that again as you see it on the screen right here. A sitting elected official responsible for overseeing elections just told a room full of Democrats that winning matters more than being right. And nobody in that room even blinked. That is not a Jaffe, all right? That is not a gaffe or an unintentional mistake. That is a mission statement. It is intentional, is my point. Now, on the flip side of all of this collapse, we are watching some real accountability finally take shape. President Trump has thrown his full endorsement behind a Republican challenger looking to unseat New York Attorney General Letitia James, as I was mentioning. This November, a former federal prosecutor who has made clear she intends to hold the office accountable. And folks, if anyone deserves that kind of political reckoning, it is Letitia James, a woman who has spent years weaponizing her office, specifically to go after this president, our president currently, and conservatives more broadly, campaigning on the explicit promise to get Trump before she ever took office. And if you are the kind of person who believes prosecutorial power should be about the law and not personal vendettas, then you understand why this endorsement matters and why her seat is suddenly a lot less safe than it used to be. And finally, let us close on maybe the most quietly devastating admission of the entire news cycle. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, sitting across from Gavin Newsom, said out loud on camera that President Trump has gotten more accomplished for the state of Michigan working with her than Joe Biden ever did, in her own words. And she tried to get things done under the Biden administration and could not, but she got it done with Trump. Folks, a Democrat governor just handed Republicans a campaign ad for free. And she did it herself. Nobody edited that clip. Nobody twisted her words. Those were her own words and her own voice. And if a sitting Democrat governor is willing to admit that openly, imagine what is happening behind closed doors. That never makes it to a camera. So with that being said, not to mention that the Democratic Party, Kamala Harris, is despised. So despised that a Democrat Senate candidate rejected Kamala's endorsement in Alaska. Seriously. Turned down support from former VP Harris trying to distance herself from the failed presidential nominee. And Alaska is red, and it should stay that way, right? So we all know Mary Patola will vote 100% for lefties and Kamala Harris policies anyway. So I find this very, very interesting.
Senate candidate Mary Patolta turned down support from former Vice President Kamala Harris, trying to distance herself from the failed presidential nominee.
So I figured that was humorously laughable. I wanted to put that in there, family, for you guys. Let me know what you guys think about that. However, so where does that leave us? It leaves us with a party that spent a decade telling the country it held the moral ground, high ground, while its own senators, congressmen, governors, state legislators, appointees are being arrested, indicted, sued, and exposed in numbers that are honestly hard to keep up with week to week. I mean, look at this, man. James Comey's over here scrambling to bury damning evidence, surveillance records, after the Secret Service aggressively tracked his communications, with that whole cover up with his wife Patrice with the 8647 shell thing. Not to mention that here we have on, President Trump posted a bombshell that CIA proved the Trump-Russia collision report that started under Obama, the Russia hoax that Trump was working with Russia to win the elections and steal the election. CIA Director John Brennan, FBI Director James Comey, and Director of National Intelligence James Clapper, look, they basically worked together to basically undermine the credibility of our president and put this hoax on him to personally attack him. And again, I'll put it back on the screen with James Comey. Trump's White House classifies documents proving that the FBI targeted Trump, and they put that Russia hoax that I just explained to you on him. And they knew it was false from the previous ICA report and have no evidence at all to even begin with. And James Comey was fired, which specifically started the Oxford Coma investigation on Trump. This was retaliation and part of the grand conspiracy against Trump for being fired. And the greatest enemy comes from within. And once again, it was our own FBI and intelligence agencies targeting President Trump, right? So, with all that being said, arrested, indicted, sued, exposed in numbers that are honestly hard to keep up with week to week. And folks, I would tell you plainly, this is not about celebrating anyone's personal downfall, because there is no joy in watching families torn apart by infidelity or watching alleged victims come forward with painful stories. This is about something bigger than any one scandal. It is about exposing a pattern of people who claim the right to judge everyone else while excusing themselves. And there is an old truth that applies here, and it comes straight from scripture in Galatians chapter 6, verse 7. It says, "Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, this he will also reap." And folks, whether you are a person of faith or not, That verse is really just describing basic cause and effect. It is describing accountability, the same accountability that gravity provides when you drop something. It is describing the simple reality that actions produce consequences. Eventually, even when you have power, even when you have position, even when the media covers for you for a while, eventually the bill comes due. And if you are watching this and you're not a spiritual person at all, here's the secular version or the non-spiritual version or the life wisdom, I should say, for those who are not spiritual of that same wisdom. You can build a career on convincing other people you are the moral authority, but you cannot actually overturn your own choices forever. The truth always surfaces eventually, whether it comes to a court filing, an FBI affidavit, a leaked text message, or your own mouth on camera sitting next to Gavin Newsom and telling him that President Trump did more than the Biden administration. And that, my friend, is a lesson every single person watching this can apply to their own life today. And I almost forgot Mr. Christopher Wray, right, who was grilled on July 12th, 2023, by members of Congress. Here's his face on the right side of the screen, as you guys can see, side by side, the hearing and him. And I bring this up because when people talk about the collapse of the Democratic Party, they usually focus on the stuff you see on the surface, losing elections, bad messaging, infighting. But the real collapse is happening underneath, and the institutions that were supposed to be neutral, and nobody represents that better than Christopher Wray. Think about what this man was sitting on as an FBI director. He had the 2020 election server. He had Hunter Biden's laptop. He had Seth Rich's laptop. He had Jeffrey Epstein files. He had intelligence that the CCP interfered in the 2020 election with fake mail-in ballots. And instead of investigating it, he ordered agents to delete that intelligence. And you thought that James Comey was just the tip of the iceberg. He had Ashley Biden's diary. Yes, he had Ashley Biden's diary, which, according to multiple reports, confirmed what many have suspected about Joe Biden's relationship with his own daughter. He buried all of it. Every single piece of evidence that would have changed the course of American history. Buried. But it gets worse. While he was hiding all that, he was actively using the FBI to go after the other side. He investigated Turning Point USA. You know, my heart goes out to the family. An unfortunate passing of Charlie Kirk, who is the founder of Turning Point USA, a conservative Republican commentator, a conservative student organization. He allowed the FBI to recruit informants inside Catholic parishes. He allowed SWAT teams to terrorize pro-life activists. He raided Mar-a-Lago, planted evidence, lied to the court about it. He charged January 6 trespassers with seditious conspiracy while letting the people who actually planned the interference walk free. And every time Congress asked him about any of it, he gave the same answer: ongoing investigation, quote unquote. And that was his shield. But now those investigations have been dug up, buried in burn bags in secret rooms inside the intelligence community. And Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, is pulling them out one by one before she left, due to going through health issues, battling with, her own situation personally, which she stepped down, but she exposed that before she stepped down and left office. But one of them, Operation Round River, is already public. The FBI had 14 informants on Biden-Ukraine corruption tied to uh, Burisma. Instead of investigating that corruption, Wray ran a secret operation to brand it as all Russia disinformation during the 2020 election. Yes, the Biden-Ukraine corruption tied to Burisma. And they manipulated intelligence reports. They labeled journalists as Russian assets, all to keep the truth from voters until after the election. And this is what I mean when I say the Democratic Party isn't just losing elections. The whole system they built to protect themselves is falling apart. And the receipts are finally seeing the light of day, regardless of party, regardless of faith, right? Of anything else. Because at the end of the day, character is not what you say when the cameras are rolling. Character is what survives once the cameras catch you when you thought no one was looking. Thanks for watching, folks. I'll see you in the next one. Spread that peace, love, and positivity. Give this video a big thumbs up if you got some value in this productive conversation. I try to be informative as possible. Let the love supersede the hate. And as always, I'm not telling you what to think or how to think. I'm just having a productive conversation. And you guys, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Peace.